So poliovirus is a good example of how changing environments can affect the pattern of infection, not whether it spills over into people. We have seen examples of poliomyelitis, a paralytic disease, in the historical literature for thousands of years. So that carving is from 1500 BCE. It's an Egyptian carving showing a priest with what we call a drop foot. So poliovirus paralyzes the muscles that control movement of your limbs. And when they're paralyzed, you cannot hold your ankle up, right? Normally we can hold our foot up because we can control the muscles, but if the muscle's paralyzed, the foot drops. And so that's a classic sign of polio. And you can see also the calf is atrophied because you're not using the muscle, so it loses mass. So we think this is polio, but it could have been something else. But there are lots of examples of polio over the years since this, but there are never any epidemics. There are only case here. Throughout the world, you can see examples of this in the literature. So this was in a stable host-virus relationship in humans. We don't know where it came from. It must have spilled over from some animal, right? But we don't know which animal. Could have been a mouse or something else, but no idea. Around 1900, though, we suddenly saw epidemics. There's actually one around 1894 in Sweden, I think. And then after 1900, bigger and bigger outbreaks in the US and many other countries. And you see a lot of cases. That 1915, 1916 outbreak there, 28,000 cases. That was just the northeast of the US, 16,000 cases in New York. So what happened here? Why did suddenly we see the change in epidemiology? So this qualifies as an emerging infection, right? It has a different pattern now. It's gone from sporadic to epidemic. So that's an emerging disease. Why is it? Well, we call it a disease, bless you, of modern sanitation. Before 1900, there were no toilets and no sewers anywhere. You used to keep a chamber pot in your bedroom at night and use that to go to the bathroom. Then in the morning, you'd dump it out. You could dump it onto the street in front of your house in cities. Yeah, people did that kind of stuff. And so viruses, fecally transmitted viruses, were everywhere. And so kids, when they were born, were immediately infected with poliovirus. But they were protected by their mother's antibodies that were crossed to the baby across the placenta. So that the baby gets the mother's immunological experience, and that protects them from getting severe disease. They probably get infected, and they make their own immunity when they're about 6 months or so. But they don't get poliomyelitis. So all these kids are being infected early. They're protected. And then if they're infected subsequently, they develop their own antibody T-cell response and no polio. At least no epidemics. We see sporadic cases here and there because immunity is never 100%. So what happens in 1900? The toilet and sewers are invented in 1900. The greatest invention of humanity, really. It made us able to get rid of these infections, at least for a while. So what happens now? Kids are born. They're not immediately infected. In fact, they're not infected until after their mother's antibodies go away. A couple of years later, you have these big collections of susceptible kids. Now when the virus enters them, boom, you have an epidemic. So that is why we call it a disease of modern sanitation. I was describing this to a journalist once, and he said, I thought sanitation was good. It is good. I'm sorry to look at you, but you're a journalist. It is good, but in this case, it delayed infection. We just didn't know that. But I love to give this example. If we had genome sequencing in 1908, we didn't have it till the 80s. Someone would have sequenced the non-epidemic polio and the epidemic poliovirus genome and said, oh, look, there are 50 differences. Those must control epidemic spread, right? Because that's what we do now. We sequence left and right, and we see differences. And I'm going to pick on the genomicists because they go, oh, this change is responsible for this property. No, you can't say that. You have to do an experiment to say that this change is responsible for this property. It's not good enough to have an association. And that's what they would have done. But the real answer was a little trickier to get at. So my lesson for you is don't take the easy road. Think about the problem and make sure that your answer is not right in front of you. So polio became an emerging virus in the early 1900s by causing these epidemics. And that's why eventually we developed 2 vaccines for polio, because all these tens of thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands globally, were getting infected. And this was really unacceptable because many of them had lifelong disabilities.